They were quite close to the airport and they were crossing the bridge in Port Elizabeth, and an accident, and went off the bridge 70 foot or so, and my dad survived. I still find it quite surreal even saying that, and I still miss her.
Jo's book pairs her own words with writings she discovered of her mum to explore how sharing food is at the heart of a shared life.
And on the shelf was this binder called The Book, something like The Book, and there were collected what she wanted to say to the world. So I was under a tree in a park, crying. A homeless looking girl, she was next to me under the tree, leaning against me, and she said, "That's all right," and she stayed with me. The most precious thing you can give somebody is your undivided attention and non-judgmental listening. If you lose somebody that quickly, a lot of conversations finish halfway. We are going to hurt other people, they are going to hurt us. The great blessing of relationship comes with that as a risk, and it's still worth it.
Welcome back to the Re-Enchanting podcast, the podcast brought to you by seenandunseen.com. I am Belle Tindall.
And I'm Justin Brierley.
And we, together with a range of wonderful guests, we talk about this theme of re-enchantment. Are we disenchanted, and do we want to be re-enchanted? And if so, where are we going to find it?
And today's wonderful guest is Jo Swinney, who is Director of Communications for the Christian environmental conservation charity A Rocha International. She's the author of many books, including The Whole Easter Story. That's a BRF Lent book available now. But Jo's parents, Miranda and Peter Harris, were the founders of A Rocha. And Miranda Harris's tragic death in 2019 was a shock to everyone who knew her and the whole A Rocha community. And Jo's book that came out a year or two ago, A Place at the Table, pairs her own words with writings she discovered of her mum to explore how sharing food is at the heart of a shared life. It's really a book about hospitality. So today we're obviously going to be hearing about those events that led up to this book being written, but also Jo's personal journey of hospitality from a biblical point of view, from a personal point of view, and really how we can re-enchant the gift of hospitality in an increasingly lonely world. So welcome along, Jo. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I hear you've been binge listening to Re-Enchanting.
Yeah, I cannot get enough.
We have a new convert.
You're
on
very
our
good.
hands. Excellent.
We'll pay you
and
later.
I'm quite an evangelist about it now
Good.
too. Yes.
Excellent.
So we can make our marketing plan redundant because Jo Swinney
got
is
me.
on the case.
We're going to go viral. Get ready.
Yeah, that makes us very
Excellent.
happy.
I love it.
In which case, Jo, it'll come as no surprise to you that we always start the same way. And what I love is that people who know that we start this way, like I'm not saying you've done this, but I definitely think some of them start reading interesting books just so that it can be the answer. But Jo, what are you reading?
So what I have done to prepare is to make sure I can remember the authors, because I've got a terrible memory. Yes.
Sure. Yeah.
But I am one of those people who has a giant wobbly stack of books by my bed, by every chair I sit in around the house, in every book I go, anywhere. I'm kind of on the verge of panic if I don't have at least 3 or 4 books on the go. So here's a non-comprehensive list of what I'm reading at the moment.
I'm so ready.
Ready for this?
Yes.
Okay, so A House for Mr. Biswas by V.S. Naipaul.
Nice.
Which is I'm not going to say it's not a slog, but it's got enough in there to keep me going. It's like a bit of a brick of a book. Sure. I'm also reading Where on Earth is Heaven by James Paul, which got to be one of the best Christian book titles. I wish I thought of it myself. And it's like a more accessible, Surprised by Hope.
Nice.
Sure.
N.T. Wright.
Okay.
And the author I've just met, and he runs L'Abri in the UK.
I
know.
only learned of that this week.
About L'Abri?
Yeah.
Oh my
and
gosh.
I saw it. I saw a little
home.
glimpse of it. I think there's like an amazing an amazing like short film about it on YouTube. And I was like, what is this place? It's been hidden in plain sight. What's going on?
Well, I know. So when you asked the question, where on earth is heaven? Quite possibly in Liss, where Library UK is.
Yes,
it is.
That
it's
is
delightful.
it.
It's so. Do
Yeah,
you know it?
I've been there to share an evening with the folk there, and it is just like stepping into a lovely little world,
How
all of its
cool.
own, that you kind of wish you could live in permanently.
I
But
know.
yeah.
So I could go on, but because I also am reading other things, but I did want to give a plug for libraries in general, because don't you think it's amazing that they let you go in and then walk out with their books and you don't pay anything?
It's very trusting of
and
them.
they believe you'll bring them back.
Yeah.
I don't know if this library lets you walk out with their books,
This library does not.
Okay,
but
well,
you
our
can still
central
come in
library,
and look at the books.
You can
which
take
is good.
20 at a go.
Wow.
20
Okay.
a go.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
They let you come in and take a haul.
Oh, wow.
How about that? Yeah. Well,
I know.
absolutely.
Everyone should use their local library.
We're all for that, aren't we? Well, look, let's talk about the main book that we're here to discuss, A Place at the Table. And you obviously opened with the events that kind of led up to the writing of the book, and events which I was aware of, but still I openly shed tears as I just read again. And so I can't imagine what it's like for you to talk about it. So in whatever way you want to, would you sort of just recap sort of what happened 5 years ago, Jo, and how it led to A Place at the Table?
Yeah, I'm sorry to have made you cry. Not that tears are bad. It's still shocking. I would sort of preface it by saying that one of my abiding kind of conclusions is that I feel enormously privileged to have got to my early 40s without a loss of that nature in this world. That's highly unusual, and I don't feel that our story is anything to shout about. Obviously, it's painful, but this world is just sometimes quite brutal, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, so to what happened, my parents were at the phase of life where they had quite a free remit within A Rocha to mentor different team leaders and organizations growing around the place. They were teaching, they were traveling, fundraising, and they were in South Africa. They were actually just coming home. They were quite close to the airport, and they were crossing the bridge in Port Elizabeth and pulling a trailer, and strong side winds and long and short, an accident, and it went off the bridge, 70 foot or so, and there's a couple called Chris and Susanna Naylor who are the chief execs of A Rocha International, and my mum, and the three of them died. The driver and my dad survived. My dad was then in a coma for about 10 days, and he made it, and that was lights, camera, end for mum. And I still find it quite surreal even saying that, and I still missed her. And I think I also have so much gratitude for strange things and big and small things, including that of all the people I've ever met, she hated goodbyes more than anyone, and she didn't have to say goodbye to anyone. So
the book, in a way, though, is a very poignant goodbye of sorts, but also it's very much a mother-daughter book, and it feels like you're sort of having a conversation with Miranda throughout it. Tell us about how you discovered this treasure trove of writings that I don't think you'd been fully aware of, that your mum had been working on.
No, I actually thought she was all talk and no action on the issue of this book, because it had been probably a couple of decades of her regularly raising the fact she was writing a book. And I remember having quite a big row over cooking Christmas lunch together, and so she was saying, I really think this is going to be the year of the book, but it might not be because so much else. And I just was like, look, basically shut up about this book until you've actually done something to show me there's a real. Otherwise, I'm really tired of talking about it.
Hearing about the book that never
I know.
was. Yeah.
So, we were clearing out her study, and she was an amazingly organised person. And on the shelf was this binder called The Book, something like The Book, and there were collected all the work that she'd done on it, her chapter outline. It's not actually, sorry Mum, but I didn't use the chapter outlines that she had thought of, but she had collected what she wanted to say to the world, essentially, and she had done quite a lot of writing. All handwritten, mostly handwritten.
Wow.
And then, so the book that you ended up incorporating all of these handwritten notes and journal entries as well into is a place at the table. I guess I'm sure that was a very emotional experience putting it all together, but was it cathartic as well? Was there did you find out things about your mum that had maybe not been so obvious, but that came to light and that sort of thing?
Yeah, for sure. I think if you lose somebody that quickly, a lot of conversations finish halfway done. And I did feel that through reading her letters, and my dad gave me access to some of her journals. He sort of did a pre-read and decided what he was okay sending out wider. I did learn a lot, and I also had the opportunity to kind of talk back a bit. I feel like our relationship is different 5 years on, even though I've only been working on my half of it. What I found out about her was that she had very much downplayed her own role in the founding and establishment of A Rocha. She wasn't someone with enormous confidence, and I had thought she was looking after us children. She was all over every bit of it, absolutely there, and none of it would have happened without her. I knew she was funny, but I really enjoyed how funny she was. She also had the ability in life to paint a very nice picture about things in hindsight. So when my girls were little, she used to talk about how amazing it was being a mother of young children, and I'd be kind of, this is awful. I hate this. When are they going to grow up? And she'd sort of say, oh, I never, didn't she say I never felt like this, but she gave the impression that it was like
she'd somehow sailed through it. Yes.
Anyway, so I came across like bits of her journals that were slightly more honest about what absolute rotters we were, and how 4 children was, as you might think, was quite overwhelming, and setting up an organisation in a far-flung country with no support. So it was kind of almost real validating to find that she wasn't quite as on top of everything as she'd implied.
Oh, what gift finding those must have been. This is just an aside question, because I want to keep going down the story of the book, but just for anyone who's not aware of what A Rocha is, can you just outline what your mum was so instrumental in creating?
Yeah, absolutely. So first off, A Rocha means the rock, and it means the rock in Portuguese because A Rocha was established in 1983 in Portugal on a headland called Quinta da Rocha, and it's easiest to explain via our 5 commitments. So I'll just rattle them off. So we're Christian. We are motivated in our second commitment, which is conservation, by a belief that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and to respond in worship and appropriate obedience to God means to care for what he cares for. We believe in the value of cross-cultural cultural diversity, and we work in community, and we collaborate with anyone who shares our desire to look after, protect, care for nature. So that's Christian, conservation, collaboration, cultural diversity, and community.
Wonderful.
Nice. All C's because you're a Christian.
All C's.
And
I
we
know.
love alliteration.
I know. We've kind of gone away from calling it the 5 C's because we work in different languages and it only
Yeah.
works in English.
Yes,
Sure.
fair enough.
Yes,
Yeah.
but we're now in, so 40 years old, we're in 21 countries. By 2030, we assume we'll be in 30 at least.
Wow. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
And you do get a sense of the growth of A Rocha actually through the book. It's not a book in a sense about A Rocha, but it naturally comes through in the journals as you see kind of this thing blooming and developing as it goes along. And yes, it did begin in Portugal, and you were a child. You grew up, for at least 10 years or so in Portugal.
Yeah, age 5 to 17.
Yeah. So what do you remember of that? And what do you remember, I suppose, of family life and, in the beginnings of what would become A Rocha, especially when it comes to hospitality, which is the core theme of the book? Because again, reading those diary entries of your mum's, it felt like there were a constant flow of visitors in and out the house. So I guess you were very aware of that as well.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be one of 4 siblings because otherwise I think nobody would relate to our very unusual childhood. So if I paint a little bit of a picture, so the Algarve is a massive tourist hotspot and very, very developed, and between 2 towns, Portimao and Lagos, is a little dirt track next to a village, and we were about 2 kilometers down the dirt track onto a headland, so with marshes and the sea around, in this rambling, scruffy Portuguese farmhouse with a courtyard and a fig tree and some vineyards, and we as a family had the first floor, a flat, and there was a little kind of winding staircase, and then downstairs there would be anything from, 5 to 20 others, and then permanent assistant wardens, they were known as, who would sometimes live in the village or close by. So around the table for dinner, our family boundaries, we considered our family to be quite absorbent. Eventually there was a door put in those stairs so that we could have a bit more of a
your own space.
Our own space. And the 4 of us kids felt quite differently, I think, about how much that space we wanted. So I tended to be of the opinion that you couldn't have too many extras in the house. And first question coming off the school bus would be, who's at home? And that was a exciting kind of update for me. And I think there were downsides.
Sure.
So bonding with people who then serially left was probably one. Sharing your parents that widely. Younger years harder, older years it was quite nice to sort of blend in with a bigger group. But and then all sorts of weird animals around the place and birds.
It sounds almost like, that TV program, The Durrells, where this family move off to Corfu to sort of establish a new life. But I'm sure it came with all its own unique challenges. But this was sort of, I think you kind of had, in that sense, hospitality modelled absolutely from the get-go, didn't you? Because it was just the way it was. People came and went. And it sounds like your mum especially was constantly sort of somehow able to kind of bring meals out and to kind of make people feel at home and welcome and that kind of thing. So I guess, how much did you sort of inherit that yourself, would you say, as you kind of started to grow up and to adult years yourself?
It's remained a really deep commitment for me, and getting married was important to me to share that with my husband. We have had a value of if there is someone who needs somewhere to be, they can live with us, or that we would want to make space for people in our lives. It's been interesting kind of debriefing with myself some of the ways I'd want to do it the same and some of the ways I'd want to do it differently, and then ways I'd maybe want to do it the same but can't because I'm just don't have my mother's housekeeping ability.
And you're not in Portugal, I guess, as well.
True.
Although Bath is a very close second.
Bath is great. Actually, when we first moved to Bath, I think we had like 20 different groups of people come to stay within the first 6 months, and it was utterly wonderful and completely exhausting. I don't think I'd quite realised how much work it is to give somebody a really nice mini break.
But
Yeah, so it's been interesting with Sean because
Sean's your husband.
My husband. Yeah. He's very introverted. He's a vicar, so he's in an extroverted job. And for him, the ideal hospitality for him to be offered is for someone to open the front door to him, show him where the drinks are, and then leave him well alone. So he's taught me that is actually what some people prefer than being fussed around and hovered over. So yeah, I have learned a lot from him about not performing or not feeling that everyone needs the same thing. Yes.
I suppose that's really important, isn't it? Because we can often feel like we have to live up to some sort of particular standard. And I guess your mum did set a very high standard at one level, but we're not all necessarily built the same way, wired the same way. So as you kind of learned, okay, what's my style? I can't, there's probably having however many people in the first 6 months of our newly, life in this vicarage might not be the best way actually to go about it. What have you found does work for you? What is the kind of the natural rhythm? What kind of standards do you sort of like try to meet, if you like, when it comes to being able to be hospitable to people and have the door open, as it were, to folk?
So I try and keep front of mind that really I think people notice if they are made to feel wanted more than the cleanliness of your front hall.
Yeah.
So I try and let myself off having to get the whole place to the point where it's perfect but might have broken me and made me resent them.
Yeah. By which point you don't want them there at all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I also do like to think ahead, and I do really love cooking actually. And so I love thinking about what people might like to eat and not necessarily just rummaging through the fridge last minute. I like loving people with food. So, and I do things like nice lighting and comfy chairs. I think I've learnt from my mum that they can create an atmosphere that's not incidental. The physical world is not unimportant, not unspiritual. So I'm not saying that's not completely irrelevant, but I think it's more about in myself being ready to be present to anyone who comes. And if I can't be, trying to tell that person when I can be, or give clear signals about how available I'm going to be able to be while they're in our home and that kind of thing.
Is there an element to which hospitality is interruptibility? In that, can hospitality happen while we're on the go in our day-to-day? And if so, what does it look like to live a hospitable life, like amongst it all, when it's not planned? Maybe when you're not even in your own home, just like who you are is hospitality. Does that make any kind of sense?
Yeah, yes.
Okay,
I couldn't have said it better myself. That's really actually what I've come to believe about hospitality. And I think that we are in such a time-poor, rushed, distracted moment in time and place that the most precious thing you can give somebody is your undivided attention and non-judgmental listening. So I do think that is probably right at the heart of what hospitality means in a biblical sense.
When you were mentioning about it's more important in a sense to be present than to have the perfect spick and span home, it kind of brought to mind, and you use it in the book as an example, Mary and Martha, in the Gospels, and that famous moment where, I always get these two the wrong way, but Martha's in the kitchen, right? Pots and pans, and annoyed that her sister's sitting at Jesus' feet, learning from him, saying, come on, you need to help me in here. And Jesus, of course, has this gentle rebuke saying she has chosen the better part, and so on. What's in that story and those two kind of famous examples of, I suppose, different ways of approaching hospitality that you would draw out?
Yeah, it's such a good story, isn't it? And I often get quite cross reading it because I kind of think, well, if the food didn't show up, they'd be singing
grumbling.
a different tune. Yeah, but I think what it says to me is that it's not like we're tempted always to look for like one rule to extract from these stories that aren't designed to be made into, you know, all-time precepts. Perhaps that's more right brain way to look at it would be to see the story and to put yourself.
You've just listened to our Ian McGilchrist episode.
It's an excellent episode, one of the best. Yes. So what I'd say about that story that's really spoken to me, and I think about it a lot, is what's the one right thing for this moment? With the precious resource of my time and attention, and given that I can't do everything in every minute, what is the thing what am I to be present for? Who am I to be present for right now? Yeah. And that's going to come at a cost of not doing other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because there's one of my colleagues actually here at Lambeth. She says, in a very much a weird capacity, but she says a yes to something is always a no to something else. And then I've started using that in my life now, in that a yes to something is a no to something, and quite often someone else. And quite often in my life, hospitality is what gets the no. And I wish it didn't. And I think I'm also in a season of life where I will always want to like gather people. And I love the thought of having like a really hospitable life and a home that's completely open. And that's just not in the season of life I'm in. I'm not in my own home. I'm in my younger brother's spare bedroom. So like that type of hospitality isn't a possibility for me right now. But what would you, are we just in desperate need? And I think I'm going to know your answer to this, but just in desperate need of separating like performance and perfectionism, and thinking that hospitality is something that we'll be able to do like when we get there, or when we get that, or when we look like this, when our lives look like that, when our kitchen's like this, when I've mastered how to cook that. Do you know what I mean? Like, how do we disentangle ourselves from that pressure? Because that is just going to make us resent hospitality, because I don't think that's its true heart, is it? That's more like performance. And no one really wants that.
Yeah, that's entertaining, isn't it? Which is a perfectly fine hobby.
Yeah.
I think hospitality can be done at any scale without a home, without anything. I think... Sorry, I feel like I'm very predictable because you knew what I was going to say already.
No, it's fine. I teed you right up for it.
You did. Boring myself. Yeah, I would say your season of life, hospitality is going to look different to a season where you're not in someone else's home. Hopefully you feel like it's your home too.
Yes, totally is.
But maybe on your train back home, you might have a book you're really, really into, and you might choose to put it down and have a conversation with someone who's made eye contact, and you've created a space for them.
Yeah,
it's funny you should mention that, because I had that very exact sort of experience just a few nights ago. I was coming back from London from an evening event, and I was obviously on my phone, as everyone is, you know, when they get on the train, and it was just me and this other guy, who, you know, if I'm being absolutely frank, kind of looked a bit sort of rough, unshaven. He was sort of drinking wine from a Costa cup, you know, on the thing. And he basically said, as I was sort of, you know, busy answering some emails, "Oh, have you just come back from work?" And I was like, "Oh, this is unusual. People don't normally do this on the train, you know, something just break open a conversation." And my initial thought was, I'll say, "No, I'm just heading back home after an event and back to the emails," kind of thing. But I actually consciously thought, okay, I'm going to put the phone down, and this guy kind of seems to want to have a conversation, so I'll have a conversation. And we ended up having a conversation all the way back, and it was very interesting. And I got more or less his whole life story, and he got some of mine, and I was kind of reminded that, yeah, you can do this. It's like often people are just waiting for an opportunity to talk and there's something about giving someone your attention when we're normally just giving it to our phone that is quite significant now in a funny way, perhaps more significant than it used to be, because we, as you say, we do live in such a distracted age. So I just found that really helpful and it may have partly been reading your book that sort of made me think, actually, this is an opportunity for hospitality, you know, in that moment.
Yeah, there's there's a hunger and a thirst that is for connection and to be seen and to be welcomed into somebody's presence that can, I think, be quite overpowering for people. Not to be alone, and it doesn't have to be a welcome into a particular place, or the food doesn't have to be actual food. A really good conversation can nourish somebody. And I'm sure that the interaction that you had with that guy on the train will have really fed him.
Who knows? But
you've got this lovely line in your book. I think you're talking about lockdown, and you say where it reminded us all that we can be just as hungry for company as we can be for food. I thought that was such a good line, such a nice, satisfying line. It makes me think, like, there's lots of philosophy and theology about this. Like, you've got Simone Weil, who talks about like how to give your attention to someone who is suffering is like a form of miracle. We've almost got like this attention economy. And then also I listened to a podcast with Kate Bowler, who we love. And of course not to love. Exactly. And she was interviewing Sam Wells, who's the vicar of St. Martin's in the Fields. And he talks about the theology of being there, like the being with theology. And I just think, so I never, until reading your book, I didn't think of those things as forms of hospitality. So like, I, in my person, can host somebody, which is so interesting. And I think actually another guest who we've had in this series, Rabbi Jonathan Wittenberg, in his book, although we didn't speak about it in the episode, he points out that the root Latin word for host and hostile is the same word. So it's like you meet someone, and then in that moment you have a choice to make. Like, am I going to host this person, or am I going to be the opposite and be hostile to this person and make them feel like unwelcome in my presence? And I just think that your work mixed with that, it's like I hadn't challenged myself enough to think, okay, every person I meet, there's a choice to host them or to be hostile to them. And that's really challenging. And I guess I was just wondering, do you have any like stories or experiences or anything like that where like you've been hosted in unusual circumstances just by someone's presence, or that you've been able to offer that to someone else, exactly like Justin has just done, just to inspire me, really? Keep inspiring me.
So I have an on-off relationship with depression, and so I was in an on phase, and just some points, just life can just close in, and wherever you are, you have to just take a breath. So I was under a tree in a park, crying, just trying to get ready to face life again, and I realised that a homeless looking girl, maybe she wasn't, but she looked like she might be living on the street anyway, she had clocked me, and then before I knew it, she was next to me under the tree, leaning against me, and she sort of said, "Oh, are you all right?" And I was like, "No, not really. Nothing's happened." And she said, "That's all right," and she stayed with me. She sat with me until I had pulled myself together, and that I will always remember that as one of the best times I've been accompanied, I don't know, I suppose, she gave me a space to not be quite as alone. And another example of very simple, profound hospitality, I have these amazing two women in my life who I call my fairy godmothers. And they live in Canada, and when they retired, they for several years got a camper van that they kept over in the UK, and then they'd go on these epic 2 or 3 month adventures in this van around wherever you can drive from the UK plus ferry, and and I for a few times have joined them for little sections of their adventures. And this camper van, it's got 3 of everything, so they have like 3 knives and 3 forks because you can fit 1 extra person in it, and then they would produce these incredible meals they'd go and find local markets, and every evening there'd be this moment where they put out a camping chair outside and put a little cloth on it, and you'd have aperitif, and then they'd also just give me all the attention. And for someone who's one of 4 children and has as many people around in my life as I did growing up, that in itself, I would arrive at this van feeling a bit desiccated, and then I'd just feel like they watered me, and then by the time I left, I'd be all kind of shiny with new buds coming, and
So one of the things I wanted to ask about was how this kind of figures in the Bible, especially. We've touched a little bit on it with the story of Mary and Martha, but it does feel like when you start looking at it, you suddenly find stories of hospitality all over the place, and you sprinkle the book with various episodes in the Old and New Testament of community and hospitality. I feel like it's often the sort of the missing thing people haven't often thought about, but it's right there, in the list of, the fruit, the kind of gifts. Hospitality is one of them, as well as teaching and evangelism and everything else. Why do you think this is actually such an important but often overlooked in our culture aspect of faith and I suppose the Christian life in that way?
Yeah, such a good question. There's don't you think all the best books have got lots of food in them?
True.
Yeah.
And the best podcasts usually as well. I think we should turn this into a food.
I think definitely from now on we need some kind of something in the middle to be munching on.
All my favourite podcasts are centred around food.
Yeah, it's like
something bonding.
Food, I know, and writing about food and eating food, all the food stuff. Yeah, so it's hospitality is very core to the way God relates to us. He is the giver of hospitality in the biggest sense of inviting us into his world, inviting us into the community of the Trinity. Firstly, then he also asks us to host him. So there's that beautiful little picture in Revelation of Jesus standing at the door of our hearts and knocking, and then if we open, it's not forcing himself in. He'll sit and eat with us, which is so domesticated.
It is, isn't it? It's not, I'll come in and preach you a sermon. It's, I'll come in
let's have supper.
Let's eat. Yeah.
It's just so often how he does things, actually, isn't it? Like when he's got to have this deep chat with Peter, I'll cook you breakfast, and then we'll talk about what went wrong over breakfast, shall we?
Yes. And then curveball, he's also the food.
Yeah.
Well, that's
Eat
a bit
my flesh and drink
yeah.
my blood.
Yeah.
So, I mean, in that sense, in being Christians and being like Christ in this world, we are essentially being asked to be hospitable, but not as individuals. And one of the things I think we've lost the most in a translation of scripture into English, which obviously is like mostly for the English speaking among us, a great blessing, is we don't have a plural you. So every time it says that we should do something, we hear me.
Yeah.
And most of the yous are plural, and they're saying you, the church, you, the community, you meet the needs of the world. You be a group that together shows who I am to the world and invites them into relationship with me, because in coming and joining you communally, that's where you'll see me at work, and that's where you'll meet me and how you love one another and how you're loved. So it's absolutely fundamental.
And as you say, it's there throughout. It's hiding in plain sight in a way. I think a lot of people, though, today, because we live in a very sort of individualistic culture that we've kind of built for ourselves. I mean, I had the experience in San Francisco last summer of riding in a driverless taxi for the first time. And it was kind of interesting and novel. It was quite fun.
I mean, you lived to tell the tale, didn't you?
Yeah, exactly. Because these literally, San Francisco prides itself on being this super technologically advanced city.
Really steep hills as well. Were you worried the brakes might go?
No. Well, all I know is that thing got me from A to B, and I was sort of filming it because it was such a kind of novel experience. And it was, the wheel moves by itself, the indicators come on, it's sort of, you can see on the display all the cars around you, it knows exactly where it needs to be, and it was mind-blowingly impressive at that level, but also deeply sort of scary as well, in the sense that this is the culture we're building for ourselves, where we can be completely alone and independent. We don't, and you know, just in a break earlier, we were talking about getting into Ubers and taxis, and it's a chance to meet someone, but there's no driver. So you are sort of building this kind of ability to live completely independently from the world around you. Anyway, that's just a long digression to say that's the world we're in, that kind of prizes almost the ability to live completely independently of other human beings now. And so it's no wonder that a lot of people struggle with community, because it requires something of you. It can be quite messy. It can go wrong, and so on. So how do you deal with that? Because that I think is often the problem. It sounds great in theory, but it's like, no, actually getting alongside people. The reason we've created driverless taxis is so we don't have to, in a way. But what do you do about the fact that community itself can be really challenging and can be sort of very difficult at various points?
Yeah, I would maybe rephrase that to say it will be challenging,
yes,
and it will be difficult, and it is messy. That is absolutely the case whenever you come anywhere near another human.
Mm-hmm.
I'm so grateful for the mechanism of repentance and forgiveness that is also built into the Christian faith, because we are going to hurt other people, they are going to hurt us, but the great blessing of relationship comes with that as a risk, and it's still worth it. And everyone, I think, knows that who's lived in isolation. Loneliness is a vicious affliction, and people who are lonely suffer hugely from it, and it can shorten your life. It can have really big physical impacts on you, apparently worse than smoking,
Wow.
over in terms of what the impacts. So yes, absolutely, relationships are messy, but with God's grace we love one another in a way that covers the multitude of horrible, ugly flaws.
It is. I guess the other part of it is, and you talk about this very well in the book, there are the expectations that sometimes come with hospitality, but also there are expectations all over the place in life today. And a lot of people end up feeling very guilty that they're not doing enough, you know, about the refugee crisis, about the climate crisis. Maybe I'm not hospitable enough, you know, and so on. And you tell a story, naming no names, of a sort of conversation you had in a cafe with someone who was basically saying, oh, you're not doing enough about the homeless crisis, you know, and you just felt kind of completely like, oh my goodness, is this another thing I have to kind of now sort out in my life? And I think you gently, well, you can tell it better than me, but the point, I think you wanted to say to that person, look, I can't do it all, you know, I'm sort of feeling overwhelmed and stressed out enough without taking on that whole crisis as well. So what's your kind of answer to that? The fact that not only do we live in a rather individualistic culture, but it's also a culture where we're feeling kind of constantly anxious, you know, the eco crisis, the eco anxiety, that all of that stuff. Where do we find hope, I suppose, in the midst of all of those kind of things that are burdening us these days?
Yeah, thank you. I think that guilt and shame is a terrible motivator to action. I'm not doing anything more for the homeless out the result of feeling rather crushed by that person. Yeah, I'm in a job that means I'm confronted constantly with very terrible trends and outcomes for species, habitats, I don't know if you remember as a child, probably Justin, you more than Belle, but driving through the summer and how many dead bugs there'd be on your windscreen.
Right, okay.
When did you last see a dead bug on your windscreen?
That's a good question. Yeah, no. So that's specifically has been one of the aspects of biodiversity
we are losing
Gosh.
numbers of individuals and species at an unprecedented rate. It's super, super depressing, and none of us are going to be able to actually individually, other than maybe Greta Thunberg, do well. Even her, she's not going to be able to fix the whole.
She can do a lot, but not the whole thing.
Not everything. Yes. So, how I maintain hope, number one is I do remember on a daily basis that God's the saviour of the world. It doesn't need a saviour. He's held faith with us. He's promised to hold faith. And I do believe that he won't let us destroy ourselves. Secondly, I focus on beauty, and I focus on developing knowledge and love of the things that I am in constant contact with, because I think wonder and love is a much more motivating thing than panic and fear. And I've also seen that when you are actually actively involved in doing something, even if it's small, that's a very hopeful thing in itself. So agency. So whether it's doing that no mow May thing, so that all the bugs and they all have a little field day.
No mow May.
I love no mow May.
Just
maybe because I'm a bit
I feel
lazy.
out of the loop here, but what is no mow May?
Well, it is what it says on the tin in a way.
As in mowing the
you
lawn.
don't mow the lawn in May.
That's
My
not
dad-
a problem with me. So.
No, my dad turns it into no mow May till October.
May till next May.
Yeah. Only mow May.
There's this amazing story from Mount St Helens when the top blew off in the 1980s, and this entire ecosystem was completely wiped out by lava and ash and heat, and it was assumed it would take generations and generations to start regenerating, and probably some human help. And because enough tiny little crevices had been covered over or protected, sometimes even where an animal had died in place, it had provided a shelter for something underneath it. From those little places, which are known as refugia, the whole thing has now sprung back into life. So that just tells me that, firstly, the world is enormously resilient, and we saw that in COVID, where nature just absolutely had a field day when we weren't actively out and about wrecking it. And secondly, small scale, sometimes things will, maybe if you just have a little corner garden, or you're helping your local park out in some way, if the rest of the city is somehow becomes a barren wilderness, maybe if you have that corner, maybe from there things will cover the city again. So
that's what I've always appreciated personally about A Rocha, is it does really kind of look at that kind of very what you can do in your little patch. Okay, because I guess again my concern, you mentioned Greta Thunberg, is as extraordinary as the work she's done is, I know a lot of people for whom she represents a kind of climate sort of catastrophism that is actually quite unhelpful for some young people.
Where they're desperate. The weight of the world on that kid's shoulders, and she's so anguished.
Yeah, exactly. And I understand that, and I'm kind of like, so I don't want to kind of at the same time ignore the crisis, but at the same time I don't want to be overwhelmed by the crisis. So, or for young people to be. So it feels like, that's really helpful, kind of just saying, well, look, go and do what you can do in your patch. And I suppose sometimes that has a kind of cumulative effect that we often
it does.
can't
And
measure.
to our earlier point, it's not things necessarily that we do on our own. And little shout out to your church, which has just achieved gold standard eco church.
That's in large part to our amazing green team, but it's obviously a group effort for
go
across
green
the church.
team, but there you go, team, right? There's no I in team.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's the thing as well about the church. Like, we are absolutely mighty together, aren't we? And the green team has got your church. I'm sure that not everyone was cut out for the green team in your church, but other people in your church will be handling a homeless crisis or providing pastoral support to newly bereaved people, etc. So
that's it, isn't it? It is where the community, and this is, I often feel like it is like the church is so often got the things it needs to actually address so much of this stuff, and it's because it is essentially a community, actually, not just a sort of one issue NGO or whatever. It's all these different people with the things that they could contribute.
And ultimately, the Holy Spirit and Jesus and God the Father, they didn't set it all rolling and step back. Like, they're actively involved in all. Colossians 2 says, "In him all things hold together." Like he's actively holding it together. He could let go and we'd all be gone in a heartbeat. So, but that means that he's not let us go.
Yeah. Is there a link? And you might say no, there's not, and then I'll move on to the next question. But is there a link between a theological link between your understanding of hospitality and your understanding of our stewardship of the planet? And if so, what is that link? Because I just think it's just always so good to reframe our responsibility to the natural world in like a plethora of different ways, because they hit everybody. So if someone is like, hospitality is their thing, how are we supposed to be hospitable to the natural world around us?
Yeah, no, there absolutely is a link.
Okay, phew, because I actually didn't have another question.
Yes. Yes, spot on. So in the Pope's encyclical, I think he calls it the community of creation. And we are very anthropocentric as Christians. We think of us humans and God a lot.
Yeah.
The biblical picture is of a wider relational fabric. God has a relationship with the whole of creation. We have a relationship with the whole of creation. Our relationship with God plays out in our relationship with creation. And for example, every time we prepare a meal or eat, we're fortunate in this part of the world to do that several times a day. We are behaving hospitably or hostilely towards our non-human neighbours. We are treating them as a resource to be wasted or abused or overconsumed or taken for granted, or we're treating that as a gift from God and his precious gift, and seeing ourselves as part of the whole, not above it, over it, separate from it, but part of something that's God's, ultimately, not ours.
Yeah,
I love it. I think, and what for me is so helpful is that actually it's in embodying community and hospitality in whatever way we find it possible in our lives, that we sort of, I suppose, engage in that bigger sense in which we are all being hosted by God's creation, and we are kind of here as God as the ultimate host of all of this. And there's something, I just often feel like doing something like being a host in a community, being part of a community, can often do more than sort of reading X number of books, on the strategies for climate change or whatever, because it just sort of gives you actually the change of heart that's needed to actually go and, along with others, live a different life in the world that kind of does that. I just wondered, as we start to bring this together, what are some of the practical tips you might offer for someone who thinks, it sounds like you're an amazing host, Joe, and Miranda was as well.
Let us all come over for dinner, please.
But I'm not. I include myself here. My wife is an amazing host. I am not. So when I lay out, the snacks for house group, Lucy always comes in and says, "Oh, for goodness sake, you need to get that one out and don't do." Anyway, so I'm just not very good. But what, for me, for the bumbling types who don't think of themselves as very good at doing hospitality, what would be some simple tips where we could start, if you like, in doing that better?
So first off, if you came to my house, the front hall is honestly a hazard. So you have to first cross the front hall, and if you survive that far, you have to survive the food safety issues, and anyway, so let's not have any illusions about me as an example. That said, I found it really helpful to think about myself as little as possible in the whole hosting endeavor, and to consider the other person and how they're going to receive care best, how I can communicate it so they'll actually receive it, to step out the way of my pride and wanting. So we have a guest book that we've kept since Sean and I got married, and I really want people to write nice things in it. And then I want people who write after it to read the nice things that other people have written. It's so embarrassing. Anyway, so I have to like remove that as a motivation. And if I have to go running to the co-op, which is handy just around the corner, and get some kind of ready-made soup, it's really not the end of the world. Like I might feel that somewhere I'm being graded down. I really don't think the person coming is going to care. In fact, they might feel better about having me to their house because they don't think they have to spend 3 hours slow roasting a thingy.
Exactly.
In a way, it's more hospitable because I definitely think that some people are just amazing hosts, like just amazing, and it's so natural, and so going to their house is an experience. But sometimes I definitely think you can tell when you're going to someone's house and you think, you haven't invited me into your reality here, you've actually invited me into a bit of a performance. And actually it would feel more hospitable if you were welcomed into mess and chaos, because actually it's a deeper hostility.
And also if you do like on a general Monday to Friday live in chaos, and then you tidy it all away before you let anyone see it, people aren't, it's not a genuine, you're not genuinely inviting them into your life or your world or your home as it is. And so there's something inauthentic about
definitely
that.
I love that, and that really shone through in the book is this idea of it's okay to be a bit vulnerable and not be perfect, and actually that often makes someone feel more welcome, because as you were saying about it feels like they're like me. It turns out you don't have to have it all together in order to be a Christian or to whatever, you know, and that's kind of very reassuring in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, and actually that is one of the things that my mum really has given me as a legacy, is the example that she gave to me of her commitment to being real and letting people into the reality of our family and our space, and she wasn't very hidden about her struggles. And I think that when people have spoken about her subsequently, they felt that she had let them know and be known, and that in that way she showed people a genuine life with God.
And that shines through in the book again. So many of those journal entries where you're getting these stories of, oh, so and so came through the door and they had this concern, and the encounters that Miranda had with lots of different people, and just also her own sort of ups and downs, you know, that come through in a number of the journal entries. I was very, very moved by the inclusion of the final journal entry, which actually was written, I think, on the day that Miranda died, or very close to.
Yeah, it was a couple of days before.
Right. And I wonder if you might share that, because I think it was actually, it was retrieved actually from the scene.
Yeah, it had been in the water. We dried it out and then we were able to read it, and it was an amazing gift because it showed us that almost, I mean, I probably couldn't confidently say God prepared her for what was coming, but it felt like there was an extraordinary sense of prescience to the verses she was chewing over and the prayers that she'd written, that gave us a sense of peace that she went straight into the arms of Jesus. That was the feeling about it. There was a funny, well, not funny, I guess a kind of nice detail. They were staying somewhere called Kazuko Lodge, and it means place of glory. Yeah, so wow. I guess we felt like,
there were a lot of things that just seemed to come together in that way. Would you mind, as you just put your reading glasses on, reading that final entry?
Yeah. So she wrote, Lord, so far on this trip, I've felt held in your peace, enabled and equipped, confident and steady. This, as you know, is not always the case. Often you've rescued me and surrounded me with songs of deliverance. Thank you for your mercy, grace, strength, presence and peace. We're so blessed. I lean into your love and faithful presence today, relying completely on you for wisdom and love. Inhabit us wholly so we can please you, bring you glory, and be a blessing. And then she's quoting from 2 Timothy 4:9-17. Well, she's summing it up, I think. Luke was Paul's only travelling companion on a hazardous journey. Paul, with only Luke by his side, defends his faith, and God rescued him from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory.
Gosh, wow. There's very little to say, really. I got the sense that she was an extraordinary woman. Obviously, she was your mum. Yeah. And there are so many aspects of who you are and the things you do that kind of tie in with that. But I just feel like this book is a beautiful gift to share with other people who Miranda was, and the wonderful way in which together you've said, actually, this is actually possible for anyone to do. It wasn't just she was a normal person with all the normal things that happen in human life, but it's been such a joy to be able to kind of talk about it as we have done today. Thank you, Jo.
Well, thank you for hosting me on your wonderful podcast.
Hey, nicely done. No, it is a gift, and we're very aware, I think, that it's a costly one for you to have given us, both this conversation and the book. So thank you so much for joining us. So kind.
And if you want more from Re-Enchanting, as ever, you can like today's video. If you're watching on YouTube, do subscribe to the channel. If you're listening on podcast, please do rate and review us. It helps others to discover Re-Enchanting as well.
It does. And as ever, you can always help to support us financially. And if you are interested in doing so, you can find all the details you will need at seenandunseen.com/give. But for now, from all three of us, we will see you next time.